Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, those of you here with us in the council chamber and also those that are streaming at home or wherever you may be for this evening that can't make it here on site. Welcome to this evening's meeting of Wodonga Council. We'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land of which we're meeting now and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, also to those from other communities who may be here with us today, for they hold the memories, the tradition and the culture of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Item 3 is the apologies and requests for leave of absence. Do we have any of those, councillors? No. Item 4, declaration of the acts, regulations, codes or laws. Acting CEO, nothing from you, but councillors, we did have somebody suggest amongst our group that we move item 8.8 to deal with that business first. Does anybody wish to speak against that? Well done. Those that are hanging around to look for the decision on the master plan, your item will be seen first this evening. So you shouldn't be here too long if you don't want to stick around for the rest of the meeting, but I still encourage you to pay attention to what else happens in the city. Declaration by councillors of any conflicts of interest. I don't think I have any of those. Thank you. The confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting. There's 2 recommendations there, folks, but I'm happy to move them into one motion for the dates of Monday, November the 15th and also Monday, December the 6th. I'm happy to have somebody move. Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Seconder, Councillor Watson. Wishes to speak against. Minutes are carried. Item 7, there's no delegates' reports, folks. Our reports for determination at item 8.8. Now, as I suggested, would take care of this business first. Planning permit 97/2021 Junction Place Master Plan. We're all fairly familiar with what that is for, what the recommendation is there for us on page 49. But councillors, I will look for somebody to move a motion. So you're happy to move as per the recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Watson. Does anybody wish to second? Councillor Bennett. Thank you, Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I think Junction Place, or Junction Square, affectionately known, probably goes back further than 2014 when that all started. I remember lifting the first bit of railway track out of the ground, so this whole process of taking the rail out of the city to give us a new city heart. Before us tonight is a plan before us. It has had a lot of community, I suppose, connection to it because you treasure our city and you treasure our heart of our city. Some of the refurbishments, some of the site remediation and the refurbishment of the heritage buildings, such as both the railway station and the goods shed. And therefore, we've got the goods shed, we've got the bean station, we've got the restaurant, we've got Richardson's Park, which was transferred across, and we've got the promenade, which we all love and enjoy for this in our city. So before us, we've got three ways to go. We can do nothing, we approve the planning, or refuse the planning permit. So, Mr Mayor, before us is probably a very big decision for our city. However, I believe because that the Dan Murphy's is not actually part of this, it's going to be a later issue in February, March, whenever it comes before us. But this is for a master plan, so we have a lot of community very concerned, and their concerns are probably valid to a great degree. But it's also the whole master plan of that environment there, or that precinct. So, I'm quite keen to see something move along. I don't want to see anything that's going to leave it as in the background for a long time to come. So I look forward to the debate tonight and see what other councillors want to bring forward to the table. So thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Watson. Councillor Bennett.
Now, I may have missed this one, but is it too late for us to suspend standing orders? Yes. Yep. Do you want to just maybe explain what that is? Yeah.
After all these years, someone's silenced me. All right, for those joining us in the gallery, essentially standing orders puts limitations on how long councillors can speak for. I guess the amount of times they can speak, and I guess gives us an order in which they do debate. We've suspended that, which essentially enables free debate until that debate is called to an end, essentially by myself, once I think the debate's left on the floor. So we now will move into pretty much open conversation between councillors as they put their thoughts and ponderings forward for us all to observe in their decision-making process. So thanks, Councillor Bennett.
It wasn't turned on. So that's the first time that's happened to me in 5 years. So I wanted to just start by talking about a few misconceptions that I've heard to make sure we're all on the same page. So the first misconception is that this is council land and council's master plan. No, it's Development Victoria's land and it is their master plan. But we as council, the planning authority, have to assess that against our planning scheme and our strategic documents. The second misconception is that it's either a Dan Murphy's or a cinema, and that's not true. The old master plan had the cinema on the Smythe Elgin Boulevard corner and the retail on the High Street side, and this new master plan just switches that around, and I'm told that was done to keep that particular end more of the entertainment precinct. And in addition to this, a misconception is that approving the master plan approves the Dan Murphy's. No, they are two separate items, but having said that the master plan is and Dan Murphy's are two separate items, if we do approve the officer's recommendation before us tonight, it does allow a permit to be lodged by Dan Murphy's for council to consider at a later date. So I do find it difficult to assess the Development Victoria master plan in isolation because what we decide tonight will have a flow-on effect. My main concern with looking at actually both the old and the new is the lack of green space. And according to our planning scheme, all the green space has been allocated. So that is Richardson's Park, Junction Square, the Promenade and Sidings Park. So I had to Google what Sidings Park was. So it's the landscaped area outside Gumtree Pies. So I think park is a bit of a stretch of what you call that, but that's what it's called. Yep, so the temporary green space that council has built, which also includes the car park, that little bit of green space too, again, that is only temporary, that in sometime in the future that won't be there. So what we're looking at now is all the green space we're going to get minus a little bit. So for me, no further open space or green space, that's a big issue for me. Within this permit though, there is extensive landscaping requirements. So for me, one of the frustrations through this process is I feel like the Dan Murphy's issue has overshadowed everything else in the master plan, for example, lack of green space or all the other issues that I heard community talk about in the Development Victoria community consultation. So I did tune into that and there was lots of issues raised. However, that feedback hasn't actually been incorporated into the master plan. Now, I completely understand that this development needs to be financially viable for the developers, so having buildings to rent and sell is how future enhancements will be made. I also completely understand that DV's master plan actually meets all our planning criteria, although a strategic document that we have is something called the Municipal Public Health and Wellbeing Plan, and this outlines a number of health priorities we have for our community, some being pedestrians and prioritising pedestrian and cycling, and another one is, and I quote here, use council planning, regulatory and policy mechanisms to reduce alcohol and drug-related harm. So for me, approving what we've got in front of us, which does involve reducing some cycle parking and approving zoning, which would allow a permit for Dan Murphy's later on, I believe is in conflict with one of our most strategic documents, the Municipal Public Health and Wellbeing Plan, which is part of the council plan. So I've sat at this table before and said that even when something technically meets the guidelines, the rules in place, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right or the best thing to do. I'm really mindful of how hard the officers and how long the officers have worked on this and their relationship with Development Victoria, and that we really do need to activate this site. I also want us to operate in good faith with developers and make sure it's very clear that whoever is dealing with Wodonga knows that we are professional, we are fact-based, and we don't just change the goalposts on a whim. But for me, council didn't come up with this revised master plan, Development Victoria did. This is what Development Victoria envisaged for Wodonga, but it is not what the Wodonga people envisage for our city heart. So as it is, I can't support this.
Thanks, Councillor Bennett. Councillors? All right. Councillor Hall.
Okay, first, it's uplifting to see so many of our community taking interest in our city heart. That's been a real eye-opener because, you know, it's always been a bit difficult getting people to, you know, there's been a lot of apathy in the past, but this highlights that there is an interest and we want, and our community want the best for our city centre. The only sad thing is that we're discussing this now, and I think it should have been done way before we've gotten to this position. And I must admit, I've been unhappy with the process of, around the master plan, and I feel like we've been left to decide on a master plan that councillors have not had any discussions or input or whatsoever. And even though we've regularly asked over the years for updates on the project. And whilst I want to see the project or the CBA Junction place develop, I mean, I think we all do, we've got to be mindful it's there just about permanently. It's going to be hard to change it once it's up. So we want the best. And I think the way we'll find the best is communicating with our community, because I think often they do get it right. The input may not have been required under the planning process around this development, but there is an expectation that a master plan of this significance should have feedback from the people who live, work and pay rates in this city, and not do it after the fact. I do appreciate that DV and the developers did decide to do a community consultation process, but this was also only after there was concerns raised by the community and councillors for not being given that opportunity to provide that feedback. This seems to have happened after criticism by the CEO and DV. So that's rather disappointing. But as I mentioned before, as I mentioned before, this was only after the fact that the CEO, DV and the developers gave councillors and the community the opportunity after the proposal that was put in the Border Mail, which was the permit that triggered for Dan Murphy's. So the lack of action by council and DV left me with these questions. Were councillors ever going to be informed of the changes to the master plan? Was the new master plan ever going to be brought to the councillors' attention? I mean, I don't know, it wasn't brought up to us until we made mention of the Border Mail article. I think my suggestion is for all concerned is that if you want to have your councillors and community come along with you, you need to engage with them, through the process. I think that's vital, and I don't understand why we, haven't had that opportunity. The consultation feedback that the community provided to DV and the developers seems to, in my view, gone on deaf ears. Nothing, as far as I can see, has changed the master plan in the master plan. In fact, I asked if anything could be changed, especially in the precinct 1, that with the retail and car parking area, and I was told unequivocally, no, the master plan footprint would not be changed. So then why did we have community consultation at all, especially if nothing could be or would be changed? Begs the question that the consultation sessions could be interpreted as information selling opportunities for the development rather than for feedback and input. This was not what the community wanted or was expecting. It is, in my opinion, that we should all be disappointed by the process around this master plan. Council accepting of objections could now be seen as a waste of time. It seems we have to decide around the adoption of this master plan, and it will be decided on its planning merits. Wodonga has the opportunity to really take our CBD to the next level, CBA, sorry. Development at any cost is not the way, and it could actually take our city backwards. We may need to take the longer journey with this new master plan, but I think that in taking the longer journey and getting it right is more acceptable than ugly car parks and infrastructure that we are being asked to accept tonight. Infrastructure that community may not utilise, and in my opinion would be a real travesty for our city and for its people. I won't be accepting that.
Thanks, Councillor Hall. Councillor Cordy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. I will probably be repeating a few points that my colleagues have made, but I think it's a good thing, not a bad thing, to see that people are on the same page. It's not a secret that we are making a decision on something that will have a huge impact on our city. And as Councillor Hall has mentioned, it may be one in our lifetime opportunity. What is done may not be able to be undone. We as councillors have had a lot of briefings and discussions, and we have agreed that when coming to our decisions, we will weigh up all possible consequences, including an appeal going to VCAT or even us losing control of what happens in the area. However, for me, and as I can see for my colleagues, the most important thing is to remain the representatives of our community. Because if we don't represent our community, we may just as well not be here and save the ratepayers 40, 50 grand per councillor per year. Our dream to create a vibrant city heart goes a few years back, before my time on the council. In front of me, I have an extract from Wodonga Planning Scheme regarding the Wodonga Central Business Area. This extract is, and I would like to quote some objectives that we had for the use and development of this area. The objective was to create a vibrant and diverse principal activity center that would function as a hub of economic, cultural, and community activities. We were aiming to encourage a highly active and cultural life. We were aiming to deliver community services and facilities that respond to the needs of the existing and future residents. We were aiming for high levels of amenity and year-round comfort. We wanted an activity center that is walkable, local, welcoming, and well-connected. We were hoping to enhance the perception of safety, and we wanted to showcase Wodonga's environmental attributes and important view corridors. And we were hoping to develop green, leafy landscape character. In my opinion, the master plan in front of us fails in many of these respects. First of all, as Councillor Bennett has already mentioned, the feedback from the community during the information sessions has not been incorporating into what we're looking at now. Secondly, what I can see in the master plan is not going to create a pleasant and vibrant city center. It's not going to have enough green spaces. It's going to be very, very hot and very, very empty in summer. It will be not the place where people want to come and spend time. It will not be the place where people want to bring their children to have a play. Councillors, residents, if you ever see two young boys getting wet in the fountain and then rolling on the grass, chances are they belong to me. I don't want to lose that. You don't want to lose that. Another point that upsets me about this master plan is the overpowering tall hotel building that cuts the place in half. I honestly think it's not a very good idea. Retail stores are good, but we need to build retail stores where they will be visited by customers. We already have quite a few empty retail stores in the center. We don't want more empty retail stores. And finally, the elephant in the room, Dan Murphy's. Well, it will not enhance the perception of safety that I've mentioned from the objectives. Well, to tell you the truth, I'm not completely against Dan Murphy per se. Responsible consumption of alcohol hasn't harmed anyone, I'm speaking from experience. However, the alcohol ban is out of place here in our city heart. We don't want it there. So, to cut the long story short, I'm not going to support the master plan tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Coulty. Councillor Senfendorfer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was probably open to start with by saying I want to acknowledge that the work that the council has done and the officers and the staff have done up to this point. It is no mean feat trying to negotiate a block of land in our heart that has so many layers to it. In that, you know, we know who the owner isn't council, the developer, etc. So it's a massive amount of work and goes well before my time. So I just want to acknowledge that work from the outset. But having read the attached report and attachments, with the recommendation that is to approve staged buildings and works to construct a mixed-use precinct and use of the land for a cinema-based entertainment facility at the ACZ1, ironically, we arrive at this critical junction for a decision tonight. This is a complex paper with many years of developing and negotiating from the very concepts and original vision when removing the railway line from our city. This is not lost and is understood by all councillors. There are many moving parts from who owns the land, as I mentioned, who can approve what concepts and of what should go where for our community, attraction, tourism and our city identity. What is being considered is of exceptional benefit to our city, its future and being brave to excel and be a regional standout for North East and border cities. In coming to a decision, I've read at length the provided documents and associated policies, strategies, plans and guidelines, not limited to the council plan, growth and activity strategy, CBA framework, plan, revitalisation plan, just to name a few. You understand it's quite complex, hence the mention about the staff. Margaret J. Wheatley said, "There is no power for change greater than a community discovering what it cares about." And our community certainly has spoken. As we are acutely aware of the public opinion on this master plan, specifically around the retail section of the plan, we have heard from the developers and Mesh on behalf of council as a third party and of course our community. I have spoken with countless members of our community across a broad section of our public, being single parents, people who have lived here for generations, commercial interests, private interests, a whole broad section. And I've listened to the community forums and had face-to-face meetings. And I thank all those that have probably bombarded all of our emails and our phone calls, and I thank them for that. However, when assessing this recommendation, I asked myself to remove the Dan Murphy's issue, as it's clear and has been made clear that this particular application forms part of a separate paper that will come to council in Feb 2022. However, this single issue has created the most conjecture and interest. Therefore, to remove this aspect, I considered, and please indulge me, what if it was a Rebel Sport or another such retail space on that location and not a Dan Murphy's? And I had to make my decision with that mindset and remove the emotion of Dan Murphy's. What was overwhelming to me, however, was the retail in principle in that space and that being the feel of our community as well. The report does state that it is satisfied that the proposed buildings and works for Stage 1 retail premises meet the relevant requirements of the Wodonga Planning Scheme. Just because it does, it doesn't mean we should. Precinct 5, being adjacent to the proposed retail space, is not factored into this report or application. Retail already exists in that space, and whilst it may meet the requirements, I'm not convinced that this supports the vision, expectations or initial intent of the city heart in that space. I do have some other concerns around some of the master plan, as has been discussed with our community. For example, the cinema being at stage 8, not enough granular details around what type of residential is being proposed in our city heart, a reduction in the green space, bearing in mind, I think it might have been Councillor Bennett that mentioned that taking away that green space would be an issue for us in the long term. Car parking as well, being 61 spaces lower than the statutory requirement, and whilst acknowledging there has been considerable negotiations in that space, it's still a significant amount of car parking and car parking issues that cause concerns for our city. Access to some of these car parks, even off at Elgin Boulevard when they weren't initially intended. So how does that junction space get activated? This has been answered through the master plan. However, how does it link with our entire city, any other DV land in our city heart? Therefore, it is with regret that I do want to see that part of our city develop, that as this paper stands and with no alternate recommendations or motions, I cannot support it unless a rigorous and prodigious argument emerges from another councillor. Thank you.
Pressure's on, Councillor Mildren. There's been round of applause everywhere so far. Away to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I should start by reiterating where I've been with this project. I started work on this project as a representative of the council circa 2011. I was contracted to the council for this and a few other purposes. So, and post that, after I'd finished working with the council on the project, I actually got involved in putting together the original contract document, or the original plans that ended up forming part of the contract documentation that now has become, shall we say, a little bit redundant according to this process. So I understand the background of what's transpired in fundamentally everything to do with this project. In addition to all that, I've been in the economic development and planning game for probably about 30 odd years, and I understand planning law reasonably well, and I understand the ways of interpreting and applying planning documentation, planning schemes, and effectively planning law. And when I come to this process, I can't help feeling and remembering something that was said to me a very, very long time ago when I first started, and that was that true urban planning is a complex and many-faceted discipline where all component parts need to be professionally integrated into the whole. I fear and I see that that's just not happening with this project. We have many interests that are being promoted above other interests in relation to this project as it stands at the minute. Contrary to some of my colleagues, I don't believe that this actually does meet the planning scheme. I think there's quite a number of things that come out that aren't consistent with the strategic objectives and indeed some of the black letter planning provisions. And to that end, I think basically we're being sold short by what's coming out in this process. When you look at the planning scheme and the documentation that sits in the planning scheme as it stands right now, it's very different to the strategic intent and the strategic work that was done by council senior executive and probably others up until around about 2013, I think, that the work had been seen to be reasonably completed at that point, and things were handed across to others to actually implement the process. It's sometime after that I think to an extent the wheels fell off, and we've ended up with the activity centre zoning amendment that has undermined quite a few of the principles that were established under the original strategic work that the executive of council and others did. And I find that really disturbing because it's opened the door for ambiguity in the planning scheme. It's opened the door for things to be interpreted in all sorts of different ways that I don't think was the original intent. Now, one could argue that, no, the strategic intent has changed with various councils since that work was done. I don't think that's true. I think the strategic intent is still what was there and what was put in place originally. To my thinking, there's so many different things, and I probably think it's, at this point, it's going a bit further than we need to. There's so many specific things where this project just doesn't meet the planning scheme. It doesn't meet the various objectives, strategic objectives that we've set. It's lacking. It's taken an extraordinarily one-sided perspective of the economics of development. From my objective or my observations, it would seem to be that the economics have been looked at the developer's interests only, or perhaps DV's got other interests and not looking at the wider implications that occur with the economics of development across the city. And there's a classic example that I throw up for that. If you put a use on the highest and best piece of land in your city that is a very low profit maker, then you're dooming or you're setting that use to be doomed to failure. And if you look at what's happening with the proposal to locate the cinema on High Street, that particular piece of land would be the highest and best piece of land of the whole Junction Place area, and it will command the highest economic rent. And it is an inevitability, whether we like it or we dislike it, over a period of time, a cinema in that location would be doomed to failure because it wouldn't be able to match the economic rent that would be demanded over time. And there's a range of things of that nature that flow consistently through this development that I find extraordinary and lacking in, I think, the professional rigour that we need to apply to these sort of things across all disciplines, not just the selected ones. I could go on and on and on, but I think, Mr. Mayor, I'll leave it at that. I do not support the motion.
Thank you, councillors. So there's a couple of options here. One is I speak to this motion while we're suspended. The other one is we resume standing orders and we go to the vote. But I'm hearing crowd popularity is saying speak, but councillors, it's in your hands. Do you want me to speak to them? Okay. So as a first-term councillor, first-term mayor, and the scrutiny alone, that's probably carried. You get a decision like this put in front of you, and it's not this decision on its own. It's every decision that comes that we as a group of 7 councillors say, is this the best we can do? It's the first question, though, the executive will be able to back me on that when I first saw and heard about this particular proposal is this the best we can do? And it's constantly rattled around in my mind, you know, the nervousness, the lack of trust from the community with the process, the nervousness and lack of trust from councillors that you see displayed towards what's really happening for those that own the land, those that want to develop and all the rest. And I guess you sort of take a little bit of offence when people say, oh, we've got to make sure the councillors listen. It's almost like we're heartless. It's almost like we don't listen, we're fools, we don't see anything other than what we're told. You know, as the mayor, I get to sit back here and watch, as you've all witnessed tonight, really good question asking, really good testing, rigorous, poking and prodding. And I guess, you know, like I think Councillor Bennett had a couple of mistruths at the start. I had a couple of my own, like, you know, 2011, 2012, from asking questions, retail was originally slated by Places Victoria, before Development Victoria, was originally slated for that same corner that the retail's slated for in this land now, in this proposal now. So if that's a fact, and I've seen that with my own eyes, then okay, that might be against everything that some of us have stood for or said tonight. I then look at, you know, Precinct 5, which we aren't discussing this evening, but one of the first questions I said is, damn Murphys, if we're putting it there, why aren't we putting our retail big box all together? Precinct 5, it backs onto where there's existing big box retail. Again, professionals within the industries of designing and planning assure me that if I go and understand the full intent of ACZ1 as a person without a planning background, I'd find out you can't put a bottle shop there at the moment. Doesn't mean it can't change. I had to stop and think, what's our role here in this? We're a planning authority. At this point in time, yes, I'm sorry, you do have to remove some of the emotion in this decision. So I look at it and I go, if the proposal broadly complies, why are we so unhappy? Like, if it broadly complies with everything that should be in front of us and it's allowed a proposal like this to come before us, why are we so unhappy? And you come back to the whole question of, what do we want? Like, what do we want? So throughout the process of assessing this myself as a councillor, and some of you that I think are in the room would have heard this from me before, I've said, well, what would you do? What would you change? What have they got so wrong with their proposal? And quite often that challenging question hasn't yielded an answer, other than it's just not paying respect to the fact of all the effort this community, previous councillors, previous executive staff, and everybody who's lived and believed in Wodonga for a long period of time, and or want to know or appreciate and respect the effort that's gone into from a community. They just can't sell themselves out, right? If you could hold the applause to the end, Mr. Goble, that'd be great. But you just, it feels like a sellout to people. And that's the one thing that no matter what you say around rules and planning and all the rest, we can't get past that stumbling block. So what's our role here, councillors? What do we really want? What does the community want? That's what you're trying to assess. And I think regardless of what might be written, what's there in front of you has not convinced anybody that that's the best way forward. So before we resume standing orders, I want to just say one thing. United we stand, divided we fall. So, do we have a mover to resume standing orders? Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Seconder. Thank you, Councillor Simperdorfer. I'll therefore put the motion as per the recommendation. All those in favour? All opposed? Right. I may have missed something there. John Watson, did you want to close? I'm happy to re-put the motion after you close.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I did want to have a close. I take on board what every councillor said and what every community member has said. I've seen the development in our city go so well and so accepted by our community. And I think we all need to have faith in what our executive officers and our officers and people are doing. I agree totally. I'm not, happy to see a Dan Murphy's, but that's another issue. But is it the sleeping part of the whole scheme of things? But I want to see Wodonga keep developing, and I don't want to see the city fall behind for some time. And I'm not going to say an ugly eyesore that'll be there, but in plans we have really good aspects of it, and a few that aren't so good, and we've got to accept the good with the bad. So, Mr. Mayor, I appreciate all the efforts everyone has done on this subject, and particularly our staff and our consultant who gave us a very good understanding and grounding to it. And I think, yes, put the motion again.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Just for those who may have missed it the first time, I therefore put the motion. All those in favour as per the recommendation? 1. All those against? Defeated. Calling a division. Now, for those that aren't familiar with this, folks, a division does allow us to vote again and potentially for councillors to change their mind. So I therefore call a division. All those in favour as per the recommendation? 1. All those against? 6. Defeated. Councillors, I will now look for a motion, knowing that Councillor Mildren had circulated some points around why you're rejecting or the refusal. And I'm going to take that document as read, councillors, because it is a couple of pages of dot points. Councillor Mildren, did you want to move as per that? Take it as read. You don't have to read the whole thing out.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll move that plus a second component to the motion, that a planning scheme amendment be commenced to reinstate the comprehensive development zone provisions that previously applied, pending a comprehensive community consultation process and development of better planning provisions for Junction Place.
Do you want me to hand that over?
So, councillors, you heard that. Have we got a seconder? Councillor Hall, seconding. Councillor Mildren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There's a whole range of reasons why we should be knocking this application back. When you go through the planning scheme, well, we'll go back to the start. When you put together a statutory planning process, it basically requires certainty of outcome, and that means not having components that are in doubt at a future date when something might have to be brought back to the council again as a part of that decision-making process. For example, you can put something in a planning scheme that says a landscape plan may be required to be brought back, but you know what the development's going to look like, you've seen detailed plans of the proposal, and you know what's going to come out of it. So, and there's any amount of VCAT precedent that says if you don't have all the plans that are necessary and all the detail that is necessary to make an assessment against the provisions of the planning scheme, then you cannot issue a permit. And there's an abundance of precedent to that effect. What I see in this application is something called a master plan, but in technical sense, we are not actually issuing a permit for a master plan because you can't do that under the planning scheme. It's not a statutory provision that's available in this context. You can do it as a strategic process under development plans and a whole range of other things, but as a permit process, it just doesn't apply. So what we're being asked to do here is approve stage buildings and works to construct a, as yet not entirely specified, mixed-use precinct. I use the word construct because that's what this is about. This is about buildings and works. It's not about the uses by and large. So we have a situation where the ACZ, the Activity Centre Zone, pretty much says most of the uses that are being proposed can happen in the zone without the need for a planning permit in respect to the use. It goes further than that and exempts from public notice almost every other use that can be applied, and certain developments as well are exempted. So what that means, for those who don't understand it, if there is an exemption from public notice, then there is no ability for third-party appeal rights. And that means if the community doesn't like what the council does, there is no ability for the communities to take that matter to VCAT to get independent resolution. So we've got, that's what applies in the current activity centre zone, and that's why the second part of my motion is to try and get that changed. My view, the reason for the second part of the motion is because my view is we are not representing the true strategic intent in the ACZ as it stands presently. There are far too many things that are ambiguous. There are far too many things that have been conveniently left off for various reasons. I'm not saying they're not legitimate reasons, but they've been left off, and ideally you would want to have some of those things in the scheme to protect the interests that come out of the strategic planning. I guess to go through all of the dot points as to why I think this should be refused, I won't do them all, but I'll pick a few. Like, the first one is we just don't have enough information to make an assessment against every one of the criteria that we must make an assessment against. There's so many things in here that are put off into the future, and the original officer recommendation had a draft set of conditions in there that started, at least one of those conditions started off if. Well, you just can't do that. If you have to put that in a condition of permit, it means you don't have the information to make a certain decision. There's a whole lot of ambiguity about the cinema-based entertainment facility. We're told that it requires a planning permit for use and development because the face of the cinema facility is greater than 15 metres at the frontage. Now, we don't have actual detailed plans of that building to be absolutely certain what it looks like. We've got a footprint style thing, but no actual plans that tell us exactly what it's like. When it comes to the goods shed, I think we've probably gone far enough in diminishing the heritage value of the building. By cutting effectively a breezeway and dissecting the building into two sections, we're basically diminishing the heritage value, we're diminishing the heritage context of the building, We're intruding into it across from what comes from a building that I would argue shouldn't be in the location where it's being proposed, and that's the motel. Just quickly with the motel, it's very big, it's overbearing, it's on the north side, it's going to overshadow the platform, and I'm going quickly here, sorry Mr Mayor, but it's going to overshadow the uses and so on the platform. It's going to diminish the amenity and the ambience of the hospitality on the old railway station. It's going to be a very, very large bulk and scale type building that stands over and imposes itself across, as well as having the dissection between into the goods shed. We'll call it for time. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Just a little over. Only a little bit over. Councillor Hall. Serving your right, councillors. Councillor Simpfendorfer. Go.
Councillor Mildren, it was very quick, that last point you made. For someone who doesn't understand the planning so much, can you, and probably for some of our gallery, can you understand the context of that last point you added?
And say it again.
To the motion? Just that, yeah, the second piece you added. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. What we've got with the activity centre zone at the moment is a document that has a huge lack of certainty about it, and it's not, in my understanding and reading of it, a particularly good representation of the strategic work and the very valuable strategic work that this organisation, the council, spent an inordinate amount of time and effort in putting together over a number of years, and reached a conclusion that was felt was a good representation of the strategic values that the council put onto that site in the context of its importance in the way the whole Junction place fits into the rest of the city centre. It's I'm not happy that we can actually get the result that we want to get by having the current activity centre zone provisions remain in the planning scheme. And I think we need to deal with them. I think the original comprehensive development zone provisions that I'm suggesting we go back to probably weren't perfect, but they were gave greater security to council in terms of decision making in relation to what happens on the site. So I think we should do that, and then we should go back and in light of, and I've heard many people say there's been lots of changes in circumstance in the last 10 years since all this was happening, and there probably has been. Lots of things have changed. So I think it's probably timely, given the circumstances we find ourselves in, to go back and seriously do some consultation with our community and seriously get down into the strategic information that we want to see set in place into the whole of the Junction Place development. I think it was Councillor Bennett said that this is a once in a 100-year exercise. We've got one chance to get it right, and at the moment we're not looking like we're going to do it. We're actually heading off on the wrong path, and it's all very well for us to tonight refuse this application for planning permit, but if we aren't seen to be trying to get on the front foot and take the right strategic opportunities and build the right strategic information into our planning system, then we're probably not doing anybody a service. We're not being honest with the applicant, and we're not being honest to our community. So I think we just basically have to get on with it and take the front foot and actually do some positive things to get the right sort of information and the right sort of provisions into the planning scheme that's going to give, one, the council the ability to make sure we get the objectives that we seek, the strategic objectives that we seek, and to two, give the developer the opportunity to understand what that's all about and understand that they have to meet those requirements. As it stands at the moment, the way it's written into the ACZ at the present minute, there's so much ambiguity in there, you could argue, oh, well, we'll just pick the ones we like, and that's not the way we should be doing it. So I hope that answered the question. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
So do I. Councillors? You're all right. Go, Councillor Linda.
Councillor Mildren, sorry, the last dot point, because that's the first I've heard of it. Can you just repeat that to me so I've can understand it. You've given us these dot points. And you added a further one? Have we? Oh, it's just the second part. So, yeah, that's not a new one. That's what we've got in front of us? No. Yeah, all right, no. Great, cool, answered.
Councillor Quilty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Mildren, could you please read out once again slowly the part of the motion that you've just added? Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. That a planning scheme amendment be commenced to reinstate the comprehensive development zone provisions that previously applied, pending a comprehensive community consultation process and development of better planning provisions for Junction Place.
Thank you, Councillor Mildren. Anybody speaking for or against? Councillor Watson.
My probably question is directed to Officer Schultz, is if this motion got up and part 2 of what Councillor Mildren's put in, what time frame would that take?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor, there will have to be a budget ask initially, so we would anticipate that occurring during the course of the budget bill process leading into the end of this current financial year. Planning scheme amendments can take 18 to 24 months. I would anticipate that would be a reasonable first bid, somewhere between 18 and 24 months post-budget allocation.
Councillors? Councillor Watson?
I'd just to make a comment and to appease the community is that I'm very much a team player. I've been involved with the council for a long time. So we've opened it, depending on if Councillor Mildren's motion gets up, this will be a whole new ball game again. So I'm a team player, definitely around this table here with this council, with the staff and with the community. So, you know, you win a few and you lose a few in this life. And I lost the last one, but we could win really very well on what if the motion gets up. So, but I do take into account all the hard work that's been done, and let's hope we can continue doing some good hard work. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hall, is this your reserved right? Yep. Assuming we're all out?
Look, I don't have that much to add, just that I see the need for the second item on the motion, being that we don't want to get back into this same sort of scenario again, and I think that it's vital that we do get those changes made, that we can move forward with the direction that the community and the councillors and the council choose. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. In closing, Councillor Mildren.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would be very concerned if a resolution passed by the council was an option pending the provision of budgetary outcomes. That would concern me greatly. Now, I'll leave it at that, and we'll see what comes of it if the motion gets up. Now, I've been through this whole exercise. I've gone through the planning scheme in great length. I've looked at the strategic documentation that's been done in the various guises over the various time, and I've spent an enormous amount of time researching what's gone on with this. I believe that the reasons that we've got down here in the dot points that form part of this resolution have validity, but I am not so silly to not understand how VCAT works, and I know, as Councillor Watson just said, some you win, some you lose, and often it can depend on a whole range of variables as to what the outcomes of VCAT are. But I think these are the strongest position that we could take in seeking to represent our community's views and in seeking to represent the outcomes that are our strategic objectives as best we can under the planning provisions that currently exist in the ACZ. So this is looking at the here and now, based on the possibility that this matter might end up in VCAT. And it would be interesting to see it tested in VCAT, because it would be another test of the notion of the level of detail versus, you know, I think the colloquial in the industry is it's not a permit to plan, we issue planning permits. If we issued permits to plan, then things would be totally different in the world. So from the point of view, I think this gives us the strongest and best position to represent our community's views, to represent the council's views, and to put us in good standing to move forward in a very positive way for both, or for all sides of this conversation, so that we get a positive outcome and we get the best result we can get for the city centre and for Junction Place into the long-term future. It could be well into 100 years, that once this is locked in place, it's not going to be easy to undo. So I think this motion puts us in best standing to succeed and get those outcomes. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mildren. Councillors, you're all familiar. You had a chance to jot down what the motion was, and you had the pre-bit of reading there as well as read. I'll therefore put the motion. All those in favour? All those against? Carried 6-1, division. All right, we'll go again. Thank you, Councillor Hall. Just to exercise our arms. Those in, I'll put the motion again. Those in favour? Those against? Carried 6-1. All right. You are all welcome to stay, but we won't hold it against you if you leave. Although if you want to know about our spray paving and different bits and pieces, you're welcome to stick around. I'll give you a couple of moments for those that were intending to leave at this point. All right, we'll recommence, folks, at item 8.1. This is the CEO Employment and Remuneration Advisory Committee. Purpose of this report, obviously, as we know, councillors, is to kickstart and get ourselves along with an appointment of a member, or the members, I should say. Recommendation on page 8. Councillor Bennett moving. Anybody seconding? Councillor Simpfendorfer. Councillor Bennett.
So very quickly, this report looks at creating a CEO Employment Committee. Councillors have one staff member, and that is the CEO. So in the purpose here, we've got the second dot point that it's all councillors involved in this committee. So just wanted to change in the summary a bit later on. It says 3 councillors, but I'm keen to have all councillors, and we did have this discussion for all councillors to be in this committee. Just making sure you go down.
Sorry, through you, Mr Mayor. I think it's indicating that in the policy it states 3, but the recommendation is the whole of council.
Recommendation is correct.
Thank you, Deb Mudra. So the new Local Government Act mandates that we have an independent member on the CEO Employment Committee, in addition to an appointment of a recruitment consultant. But those 2 positions could actually be the same person. So what's happened so far is that the staff have invited expressions of interest for the position of the independent member and advertised for the recruitment consultant. So the next step, if this gets up, would be councillors meeting in January. And again, we did have this discussion that, we just need a quorum there. So if we can't make it, the show must go on. So I'm keen to move this and see this get up.
Councillor Simpfendorfer. Reserve, councillors? No? No one else wishes to speak? Reserved, Graham? Do you want to add?
Very well summed up by Councillor Bennett, thank you.
Councillor Bennett in closing, nothing further. I've therefore put the motion. All those in favour? Thank you. Carried unanimously. 8.2 is the charitable purposes policy. A reminder, councillors, of that list circulated to you all this afternoon. Policy obviously intended to provide a consistent approach for considering requests for rates exemption. No changes recommended to the current. Move a motion as per the recommendation. Councillor Bennett, Councillor Watson, Councillor Bennett.
Just really quickly, Officer Klein, when you, when people, when organisations apply for this and are granted this, there's no check-in point, is there? It's just, it's rolling from there?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So when we have businesses or charitable organisations apply, it's part of the conditions are that they are required to notify council for any changed purpose for the premises that they're using. And we do certainly get a lot of information through our valuation processes and those sorts of things around who the tenants and those sorts are. So any changes that we're aware of, we would certainly be following up with them. But the condition is that the rate exemption continues on until there's a change in use that's notified by the tenant.
Oh, it's been a long year. Councillor Quilty.
Thank you. I just have a question following Councillor Bennett's question and Officer Klein's report. As I understand, the entities that have charitable purposes are expected to notify us should they change their purpose. Is there like a self-assessment obligation that's annual, or do we conduct audits, or is there any mechanism? I don't think it's a big issue, but having that question up here, it's interesting how we handle it. Thank you.
Sure, through you. So the information that we receive when we get an application for charitable purpose is quite considerable, and there's a lot of information regarding their constitution, the actual purpose, financial statements, annual reports, confirming that there's no dividends that are received by any shareholders or directors or other persons and so forth. Our systems also record the tenancy and what it's used for. So generally with the, there has been a list of all of those organisations who have got the rate exemption granted through this policy. And as you can see from the list, they're all fairly well-known entities. So changes in them, generally that gets picked up through the landlords if they're tenants, or if there's any changes, it does come to our attention if there's something that we need to follow up with them. But they generally are fairly well known, and the activities that they're running from those premises are very well known. So if there was an instance where we weren't notified, I don't think it would take very long for it to come to our attention anyway.
Councillor Watson as a seconder.
Mr Mayor and councillors, I really appreciate Narelle's email this afternoon regarding which businesses and organisations within our city, and that made me very comfortable where we are sitting with it. So I'm more than happy to vote for this for it.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Any other councillors before I give it to Councillor Bennett to close? No? Councillor Bennett, closing?
Very minor, but on page 12, Councillor Sinfendorfer just picked up relevant law. It's the old Government Act, so it should just be the new local government.
So there's no rating provisions in the new Local Government Act. They still are contained in the old Local Government Act, so it is still the appropriate act. There was a review of the rating system, of which nothing much has come of it at this point in time, so we're still operating under the old act when it comes to rates.
Officer Klein, you're all over it. I just recently chatted to Food Share, and they have applied for one. And for them, it was a huge amount of money. But you know, when they said that to me, I thought, oh my gosh, that's such a small amount of money. So it's, you know, it's a massive amount for a community organisation. But I think for us, even when we look at the total amount, we've seen that list of, you know, fantastic organisations. I think it's an investment for us in the organisations that really help keep Wodonga afloat and help keep people, you know, the opportunity to thrive. So great to have this up, and great to see the list of everyone who's taking advantage of it. Thank you.
Councillors, therefore put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 8.2, the Sport and Recreation Funding. Sorry, 8.3, thank you, Kevin Scully, Governance Officer. Page 14 is the recommendation. Moving as per recommendation. Thank you, Councillor Mildren. Do I have a second? Councillor Bennett, Councillor Mildren.
I think there's not an awful lot to say. I think these are admirable projects, and we should be supporting them. And that's supporting the things that go on in our city and supporting our communities. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Bennett.
Just a quick question to Officer Hogg, page 18. We talk, the two projects we look at the user contribution. So there's one for the Birallee Park Oval, but the Martin Park 2 is TBC. Do we know when we might get that?
The application at this point isn't relying on it. If council elect to adopt this motion, it won't be relying on it, but it will be relying on the council contribution for one of the items. And as you can see, the other one, there is no council contribution.
That was a question, Councillor Bennett. Did you have anything to speak? No, all good. Any others to speak for or against? Councillor Watson.
Mr. Mayor, it's just pleasing to see, like, unfortunately, things like AFL, you know, put guidelines in and the best playing grounds and best facilities and things like that. So, which is really good to follow. I think it's just going to be another great asset in our city if this gets up and gets going, and showing our community that we are spending money not just on Barranduda Fields but within our other community assets in our city.
In closing, Councillor Mildren, nothing. I'll therefore put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 8.4 is our tender for spray seal program 2018 to 2021. Page 20, there's a recommendation for awarding the contract on the 2021 to 2022 spray seal program. Does anyone wish to move? As per recommendation, Councillor Watson. Second to Councillor Bennett. Does anybody wish to speak against? I'll carry that one unanimously. Thank you. Item 8.5, on page 29 of the agenda, the proposed sale of CBD West request for contract time extension. This report proposed a 12-month time extension to the date set out in the contract to sale for CBD West. Councillors, does someone want to move a motion? As per recommendation, Councillor Watson. Thank you. Second, Councillor Sinfendorfer. Councillor Watson.
Just very briefly, is that, you know, given that it's going to be a really great development, to give them that little bit of extension of time for whichever reason they need it for, I think it's a good thing, so that we keep it on our books and keeps up in the air on that development. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Sinfendorfer. Reserve, thank you. Councillors, Councillor Quilty. Quilty first, then I'll come back to Mildred.
Thank you. I wasn't going to speak. I was going to ask a question, please. And I'm not sure who to address it to, so whoever can answer. If we grant this extension today, is there... we can't obviously predict. We don't have a crystal ball for whether they will ask for further extension. should that be needed. But is there room in the contract for further extension, or like, you know, is it in your assessment how likely it is that should they ask for further extension, they will succeed? Am I making sense?
Director Schultz is more than happy to answer that because I know that he and I were having this discussion earlier today.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Quilty, I think if you'd asked me that question 12 months ago, I would have said probably no, there's no reason to extend it. So I'm a little bit hesitant to say there's no reason to extend it. Now, we do know that the proponents, the developers, are working feverishly with a refresh of their proposals for the development. We know that, as an example, from tomorrow they will have some geotechnical boring taking place on the site because they need to ascertain exactly what the geotech situation is for their car park, basement car park design. So they are progressing well on the redevelopment or the redesign of theirs. I would certainly hope, as I'm sure we all do, that we will see development commencing on that site in the course of the next 6 or 9 months. But difficult to answer your question in specifics. I hope that goes some way.
Councillor Mildren.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ordinarily, I would possibly be raising some queries and questions about sanctions because in the business world, you don't get away with this stuff scot-free. But in the circumstances, I recognise, and I know COVID's become a pretty convenient excuse for many things in the world we live in now, but I recognise COVID has no doubt impacted on this. And I recognise some of the other insecurities and things that are going on around the place, around that general locality, have probably created some hesitancies. And I understand for all those reasons that we need to be perhaps a little bit more flexible in the way we approach this in the circumstances that we face right at the minute. It could be argued that there are some circumstances that might see that council has a little bit to do with the things that have slowed it down, but they haven't actually come out and said that. So, so from the point of view of the circumstances we find ourselves in, I'm happy to support the motion, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Mildren. Other councillors? Councillor Simpfendorf, you reserved your right. No. Councillor Watson in closing.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sure the acting CEO will send off the required letters once, if this is moved tonight, but I think it's just a good thing, good business sense that we do this.
Thank you. Councillors, I therefore put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 8.6, the On-Road Cycling Safety Program. The Department of Transport seeking council support for road safety upgrades for cyclists. The upgrades would be on Pierce Street and Elgin Boulevard. There's a recommendation on page 35, councillors. Councillor Bennett, as per recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Simpfendorfer. I don't know, you both went up at once. Sorry, I was looking both directions. Councillor Bennett.
So this is Regional Roads Vic and the TAC. They've received funding from the Victorian and the federal government to implement some road safety upgrades for cyclists, so some cycling lanes. They have checked, lots of documents against this. I would also say they probably could have checked the Municipal Public Health and Wellbeing Plan, and they have done community consultation and a detailed design. A particular point that is worth noting is the second one. The improvement works would be monitored by Regional Roads Vic and Council. So if what they want to implement doesn't work for our community, it's quite easy to just to change that. So they looked at 9 routes and looked at a range of different things, and then in discussion with council officers decided 2 particular routes would be the best for greatest community benefit and for minimising impacts to vehicular transport. One of them is the Elgin Boulevard route, and that was shown to have no traffic impact. The Pierce Street one was, but that impact is only, so there's a short span of time, 15 to 20 minutes, and the queuing time might increase by 1 minute and 5 seconds. So I think that's pretty doable. But again, if it's not, we can change this. They also did a real life simulation and didn't notify people because they wanted it to be a real life thing, and all the feedback was positive. But if these cycling lanes don't work for our community, we can change it.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Simpfendorfer.
Probably rehashing exactly what was just mentioned, but that was the point I wanted to make too, to see that the monitoring by both RIV and us to ensure that outcome is going to be achieved is a really good thing in this particular sense, and certainly road cycling safety, is very important to us in our community, and even some of the off-road, Mr Mayor, safety might be good, especially when councillors come off their bikes. But in all seriousness, great to see that we get to monitor it, and if the desired outcomes are achieved, we're going to reassess. So it's pleasing to see.
I don't think anything can help your cycling skills, Councillor Simpfendorfer. Councillors, Councillor Mildred.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Whilst I think we've done a pretty good job in Wodonga over many years in relation to our cycle networks and paths, I think we missed the boat when we redesigned Elgin Boulevard. And this fix that we're putting in to Elgin Boulevard is a band-aid. And in terms of your urban design and the outcomes, it's probably not very good. As a sort of an interesting point, as part of researching all the information that applied to the Junction Place planning application, I came across what would seem to be a conflict in our planning scheme versus some of our other strategic information in relation to cycling. The planning scheme basically says under no circumstances should we be taking out car parking on Elgin Boulevard, which is very interesting because what this does is it takes out every single car park, as I understand it, between High Street and Smythe Street. I think there's a total of 8 from memory. I think that's what we were told the other day. And I think that's very short-sighted, and I think we should be looking at alternative ways of dealing with the cycling. And I think the way we've done the development of that section of Elgin Boulevard leaves a fair bit to be desired. We could have designed into that. We had an opportunity to take a wider road reserve, and we could have designed into it off-road cycling, separated grades, the whole bit. But for whatever reason, we chose to take the North Fitzroy version and whack cycling into the road reserve or into the road pavement. And basically, the philosophy that was created by the state government in the early 1990s, which I was a part of the creation of, was that putting cycling in the North Fitzroy version of the world was the last option. You only did that when you had no other options. Well, we missed the boat here. So I think we're going to have some trouble by taking all those car parking spaces out. I think it's going to diminish what happens at Junction Place, and I think it's going to diminish the accessibility to our parklands and the square. It'll diminish some aspects of accessibility into the markets and things. And not least of all would be people with disabilities and the like. If they want to be parking close by, those parks are going to be further away. So I think we're probably making a mistake with this. I've got some reservations about the Pierce Street version, but I'm happy to follow the line that we test it and see what happens. It may or may not be the right answer, but I'm not going to support the resolution as it stands, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mildred. Councillors. In closing, Councillor Bennett.
Question, Officer Schultz. With those car parks, to my knowledge, none of them are disability car parks. Can you confirm that?
I'll give you a guess. I'm pretty certain they're not. I'm pretty certain they're not. Is there one?
No, that's okay. I was under the impression that it wasn't disability parks. So with this, you know, there's a thing called, look, I don't know if it's still called this, but it's Super Tuesday Bike Count. I don't know if it's still called that. And we do that in, you know, that's done across Victoria or even maybe Australia. And every single year, I was involved with this many moons ago, and every single year that number increased. Every single year we see more people cycling on and off road. And there are barriers to, you know, we just had our physical activity strategy come up, and we looked at, you know, certain barriers, and people feeling unsafe certainly is one of those barriers, and not having the right infrastructure for that. So here's an opportunity where it's not costing any ratepayer money. We're getting other people to do all the work and pay for it, where we can test out one of these strategies. Did I get something wrong? No? Yep.
I also just want to point out that no car parks are impacted in the precinct of Junction Place. The works generally go as far as Smythe Street and down to the House Creek Bridge, not outside Junction Place. There's some line marking, but the car parking remains in place in the precinct of Junction Place.
Thank you, Officer Schultz. I think for us to test one of these ideas with state government and federal government's money is a good idea.
All right, we got there. Councillors, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? All those against? Carried 4-3. Thank you very much. 8.7, the amendment to the Wodonga Planning Scheme to correct anomalies. C137, page 41, sees a recommendation. Councillors, somebody prepared to move? Councillor Watson, seconder. Councillor Bennett. Councillor Watson.
Mr Mayor, I think as we're all very aware that there are irregularities that come up in our planning scheme, and things need to be changed from time to time, and this is just going through the process of fixing those anomalies and taking it to the Minister for Planning to approve it. So it's a very, very dry reading, and it's there before us, and yeah, happy to move the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Bennett, no. Anyone wish to speak? Anything in closing, Councillor Watson? No. Therefore, put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 8.8 we've taken care of, folks, obviously earlier in the night. 8.9, tender for Birallee Park Hockey Pavilion redevelopment. Recommendation on page 70. Would somebody like to? Councillor Mildren, happy to move. Do I have a second? Councillor Simpfendorfer. Councillor Mildren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is a project that I've been fairly supportive of from day one, and it's had a interesting birthing process, I might call it that. I think it's time now to get on with it and get the thing done as quickly as we can and do what we need to do to make it happen. It'll be a really good facility to have in the city itself. It'll complement what goes on in other sporting facilities we've got. It'll complement what happens with Barranduda Fields. It's not competitive against it. I think it's great that we keep this stuff spread around our whole city, and I think we should try and continue to support hockey and other sports of the, you know, that require large spaces, fields, as much as we can. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Mildren. Councillor Simpfendorfer.
Not too much more to add. I think I agree with those sentiments from Councillor Mildren. It is good to see that we get something so significant as this for sports that don't generally get the attention like some of the bigger ones can, and I look forward to seeing this hopefully get through and deliver, as we say. Let's get it happening and get it moving for our city.
Thanks, Councillor Simpfendorfer. Councillor Quilty, question or want to speak? Question, go.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In fact, I have two, possibly three questions, depending on the answers. Firstly, I would like to confirm in the recommendations, point 3, we're talking about contingency allocation of 200,000 to address any unknown conditions, and point 4, 500,000 to be allocated from surplus saving. So how much worst case scenario on the outside, how much are we looking at allocating in this recommendation, 500 or 700,000?
Through you, Mr Mayor, it's $500,000.
So 200,000 is included in the 500,000? Sorry about that. Okay, so 500,000 including the 200 in the in point 3. Okay, well, it makes my following question less costly, but I will still ask it, just because I've written it down. So, when having numerous budget workshops and discussions, we spoke about the importance of sufficient cash reserves to address any future unforeseen events or opportunities. And also we discussed borrowing money for the depot, because I know it's not related question, but everything is related, that's in the budget kind of. So we discussed borrowing money for that, which sort of places us in a good place for achieving this outcome of cash reserve. How will dipping into this stash this time and possibly, well, we're talking about this time, how will affect our position in having the desired cash reserves?
Through you, Mr Mayor. So the 500,000, we're suggesting that that comes from the cash surplus that was generated from the 2020 to 2021 financial year. So there was 1.6 million that hasn't been allocated to anything at this point in time. It will carry forward to the budget discussions. So with this particular one coming up now where we need some extra funding, we're suggesting that from that 1.6 million, we allocate 500,000 to this project, and the remaining of the cash surplus will be carried forward and considered as part of the 22-23 budget process.
Just one little one. What is the time frame? When is this money needed by? I presume that we don't have time until budget to have a look at it. It's not, yeah, it's 500,000, it's not millions, but. Yeah.
Councillor, I think if we would like to make the tender award and confirm the tender award as a matter of some urgency so that works can continue first thing in the new year. I think it would be wise to have the money confirmed, that we have the full allocation for the contract before the tender documents are signed, contract documents are signed.
Thanks, Councillor Quilty. Councillor Watson?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I think one thing we should always note that the actual hockey club has put a large amount of their own cash involved in this, and it's been a long-term build and plan for this precinct. But it also sort of finishes off the whole precinct there. That we've got the jump track, we've finished off the cricket, the small cricket, you know, like, I think it's really making that precinct nearly complete once this is built and finished off. So congratulations to all those hard-working people, one at Wodonga Hockey, but all the people have got the grants together to make this happen. So I think it's going to be a good thing for our city and sport and getting more people back playing our hockey.
Hockey players can play good golf, John. Everyone except for me. All right. Anyone else wish to speak before Councillor Mildren closes? Councillor Mildren, anything in closing? Happy to put. Thank you. We'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. And into items 9.1 is the annual report, Council. That's really for noting. Somebody prepared to move. Thank you, Councillor Watson. Do you want to speak something in a second? Yes, just wait. I'll get a second first, then you can mention. Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Watson.
Mr Mayor, I think you know, the annual report it has to go without with notice that the Lawrence Street Bridge hyphen and the Burraja cultural part of that is what we've done in those 12 months. The annual report is really a compilation of everything we've done for 12 months. And also the sad, you know, Anna Speedy and all her work she's done over years. That was her final, sort of the final part of her process. And also, even in the short time that Mark Dixon was the CEO, there's been a few things that have been put on the board. So, yeah, I have much pride in putting forward this motion, and also the front page that, you know, our staff actually listen to us, and we've got those lovely people off the front of the building on the front page. So thank you very much to Kelly and all her staff who've put it together.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Bennett. Anybody wish to speak against? I can carry that there, can't I, if no one's speaking against? Yep, we just have. Thank you very much. Oh, we need to close the council meeting. Am I up to that yet? Hang on. No, oh no, sorry, reports for information. I'll kick you out soon though, I promise. 10.1, the finance report, councillors. As always, I'll rattle through these and pull me up and just scream out because I can't see you because you're both at extensions of my neck. 10.1, the finance report. 10.2, the planning report. 10.3, the competitive services report. 10.4, the decisions register. 10.5, the record of councillor meetings. Thank you. Notices of motion, there's none. Petitions, none. Council seal, none. General business, councillors. Councillor Bennett.
Just a quick congratulations. I got the Landcare spring issue and saw that our own Gardens for Wildlife, Wodonga, won the Environmental Volunteer Award. So they have hosted 45 free or low-cost events for 1,800 of our residents, and they also received one of our community grants, so they have made that money go a very long way. They have 330 local volunteers. Those volunteers have planted 810 native species in residential gardens and more than 2,700 native and Indigenous species in local parks and reserve. They've had 40 stories in the media. And one thing that I particularly wanted to highlight that they have done really well, and I don't think anyone else is really doing a lot of work in this space, is educating the community about responsible cat ownership. So we have had the domestic animal management plan come up, and certainly this was, cats was actually a thing we talked quite a lot about. And they have hosted 2 successful DIY cat enclosures. So they've highlighted local people who have made these enclosures, and that's been able to, you know, keep their cats away from hurting wildlife. And they were so successful that a local person said there's actually a business opportunity in this. Now they have a business to actually build cat enclosures. So well done to them. And I couldn't help but just see this amazing opportunity for another recipient was the Cape Patterson Residents and Ratepayers Association and the Harmers Haven Residents and Ratepayers Association. So they have worked together since 2009 to do various things around community education. They've fundraised to build boardwalks and bridges. They've commissioned ecological studies. They've done a lot of community education around, you know, having dogs on leads, weed mapping. Like, isn't it wonderful to see what a Ratepayers Association could do?
Councillors, any other general business? Councillor Mildren.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've had a number of people that are taking a very keen interest in the roundabout on Chapel and Thomas Mitchell Drive speak to me and congratulate the council on the retaining wall that's been done, with the added bit that they wait with bated breath for the road surface to be fixed. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mildren. What did I miss? What did I miss? I've said or done something, haven't I? Councillor Simpendorf, you got some general business? No, that's enough out of you then. Councillor Hall, did you go to jump forward before to say something for general business? Do you want to leave me for some general business? What? I've missed something. What have I missed? Okay, righto. I'm going to just slot in some general business here, which I probably would have done at the close of the meeting, but just knowing that we will lose some of our chamber, what's left, and also those that may be streaming online. And that is to very much thank a lot of people within our community. It's been a very challenging and highly tensile 12 months for absolutely each and every single one of us. You can't single out medical staff and say that they deserve the most congratulations, because I think teachers have done it pretty tough too. You can't congratulate teachers. I think parents have done it pretty tough too. I think even when you don't stop and reflect and recognise how challenging a time we do live in at the moment, you just got to stop and think, we'll all end this, I guess, more resilient, whatever the sort of ending, whether it fades out through, different variants of the strain and what have you. But I think, we should thank those in the community that have really made Wodonga and therefore the region a very good place to live and a very safe place to live over the past 12 months. And that may be sometimes politicians or political departments that we might not necessarily always agree with. We should thank our staff who have all been extremely creative, as have their teams, in terms of how do you just keep on keeping on with every challenge thrown in front of you. So I think we need to thank them. I want to thank my fellow councillors, I should say, but all of us, because I sort of touched on it tonight at item 8.8 at the start. I had a lot of people challenge me in recent times about how the councillors work as a group. And they said, do they fully understand what their role is? Do they fully understand, And each and every time I say, I sit in the room each and every time we brief, each and every time we meet, and I watch it in action. And I can say, yep, you know what? They've got the community interest at heart each and every time. So thank you and well done to each of you. And I do really genuinely want to wish everybody who may be left on the stream in the chamber or in this organisation a very safe and Merry Christmas, because as I said, it's been a challenging 12 months. We still enter another year with uncertainty and wondering what's going to happen next, because none of us do have a crystal ball, like also none of us have a magic wand. But I think we'll all cherish time with our families, and as even this afternoon, late in the day, we watched Western Australia announce Feb 5's their opening date for their border for anyone that needs to reunite with family and conduct business over there. Some things are returning, although nervously, to a normal. So, well done. Merry Christmas and stay safe. And they'll close out the general business there and just say probably no urgent business, councillors, I'm guessing. So we might... Councillor Watson, sorry.
Just a question. In the draft agenda, we had the 18 Tower Street, Wodonga, but we've withdrawn it. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure, because I didn't want to think that but I read it in the draft agenda, but it wasn't in the... Yeah. Thank you.
Good question.
Councillor Mildren, I thought the applicant was going to revisit the application and submit a new application in the new year. That's about the best information I have at this stage. Yeah.
Thank you, councillors. Question time before we close the meeting out to the public. I know there's no questions this evening. Acting CEO. Thank you. I think all the questions were answered. All right. I need somebody to move that we're going to close the meeting to the public. Thank you, Councillor Bennett. To seconder, Councillor Hall, does anyone wish to speak against? No, therefore carried. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attendance this evening. All right, councillors, we need to adopt the in-camera recommendations. Somebody move. Thanks, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Hall to second. Anyone wish to speak against? No. Therefore, everybody, I highlight now that our next ordinary council meeting's on the 6 p.m. on February 21st, 2022. Once again, on behalf of all of us, Merry Christmas, and we will see you next year. But we're always available should you wish to call us at any point in time. Thank you.